Autumn had just begun to paint the city with strokes of amber and crimson when Emma Walker decided to change her life. For 30 years, she had lived in the same rhythm. Mornings filled with hurried coffees, days consumed by office meetings, and evenings spent staring at glowing screens. Her friends often teased her for being married to her work, and perhaps they were right. Beneath her calm and responsible exterior lay a longing she rarely admitted to herself. The desire for something deeper, something that would break the silence of her carefully ordered existence. The first step toward that unknown came unexpectedly. Emma had been accepted into a prestigious writing retreat held on the rugged coastline of Cornwall. She had always loved words, though she had never dared to pursue them beyond private notebooks hidden in drawers. This retreat promised inspiration, fresh air, and days free from routine. Most of all, it promised change. The train ride to Cornwall felt like a journey into another life. Through the window, fields rolled endlessly, dotted with cottages and winding roads. The ocean appeared suddenly, vast and untamed, its waves crashing against cliffs that seemed to guard secrets older than time. Emma felt her heart stir in a way it hadn't in years. Something about this place spoke to her soul, raw, wild, and unrestrained, everything she was not but deeply yearned to be. The retreat was set in a sprawling old manor perched high above the sea. Its ivy-covered walls and tall windows reflected centuries of stories untold. Inside, the air carried a blend of salt, wood, and history. Other writers had already gathered in the main hall, some chatting, some scribbling furiously in notebooks. Emma introduced herself politely, but soon slipped away, drawn to the pull of the cliffside path. There, standing at the edge, she let the wind whip through her hair and breathed in the sharp, salty air. For the first time in years, she felt alive, as if the ocean itself had shaken loose the wall she had built around her heart. She didn't yet know that this place would change everything. She didn't yet know that love, unexpected and overwhelming, was waiting just around the corner. As the sun dipped low, casting the horizon in molten gold, Emma stood with her heart racing and her mind quiet. Change had arrived, though its shape was still hidden in the distance. And somewhere, not far away, another soul was preparing to cross her path, setting in motion a story neither of them could have foreseen. The next morning, Emma rose early, awakened by the cries of seagulls and the steady rhythm of the waves against the cliffs. She had never been much of a morning person in the city, but here the dawn seemed different, fresher, almost insistent, urging her to step into it. She wrapped herself in a light sweater and wandered outside, notebook in hand. The path led her down toward the beach, a crescent of pale sand framed by jagged rocks. The tide was low, leaving behind mirrors of water that reflected the vast sky above. Emma felt small but strangely free, as though the endless sea had taken her burdens and scattered them into the horizon. She sat upon a weathered piece of driftwood, opened her notebook, and tried to capture the immensity of it all in words. That was when she noticed him. At first, he seemed part of the landscape, a tall figure moving along the shoreline, steady and calm, as if he belonged to the sea itself. His pace was unhurried, his eyes scanning the sands as though searching for something invisible. Emma felt a flicker of curiosity. The manor had been filled with strangers the night before, yet she hadn't seen this one among the crowd. He carried himself differently, not rushed or restless like the others, but rooted, like someone who had long ago made peace with solitude. She tried not to stare, but there was something magnetic about the way he paused to pick up a shell, the way he tilted his head as if listening to the ocean's private secrets. Emma lowered her eyes to her notebook, but the words blurred. Instead, her thoughts drifted toward the stranger. Who was he? A fellow writer? A local? Or perhaps someone simply drawn here by the same inexplicable pull that had led her? The man eventually disappeared behind a curve of rocks, leaving Emma with a heart that beat faster than it should have. She shook her head at herself, smiling faintly at the silliness of her reaction. After all, She had not come here for distractions, certainly not for daydreams about strangers. This retreat was meant to help her rediscover herself, not lose herself in someone else. And yet, as she climbed back up the cliff path toward the manor, she could not shake the sense that his presence was significant, like the first note of a melody that would not leave her mind. Later that day, during the retreat's opening workshop, Emma found herself unable to concentrate fully on the exercises. The words of the instructors faded in and out, replaced by images of the shoreline, the morning light, and that solitary figure walking as though the sea belonged to him. By evening, when the sun melted into shades of rose and violet, Emma returned to the cliffs. She told herself it was for inspiration for the air and the view, but deep down she knew it was also hope, a quiet hope of seeing him again. She did not. The path was empty, the sea restless and wide. Still, the thought of him lingered, settling into her like a story just beginning. Days at the retreat began to fall into a rhythm. Mornings filled with workshops and exercises, afternoons scattered with long walks and private writing, evenings gathered around firelit rooms where stories and laughter mingled with the scent of wine. Emma, though polite and engaged, often found her thoughts wandering beyond the walls of the manor. The ocean had become her true companion, its moods echoing her own, calm and bright one day, wild and storm-tossed the next. And then, he appeared again. It happened one afternoon as Emma sat on a bench overlooking the cliffs, her notebook open on her lap. The sea stretched endlessly before her, gray and restless under a sky streaked with clouds. From the corner of her eye, she noticed movement, the same figure she had seen days before, walking steadily along the path that wound down toward the cove. He carried a satchel slung across his shoulder, and his expression, though distant, seemed thoughtful rather than burdened. Emma felt a ripple inside her, an almost reluctant recognition. It was as though fate had chosen to weave their paths together, subtle at first, but undeniable. She wondered about his story. Was he a writer, too, seeking refuge in words? Or had life drawn him here for reasons she could not yet imagine? Later, she learned his name, not through conversation, but through whispers in the dining hall. He was Daniel Hart, a novelist who had once tasted acclaim only to vanish from the literary scene years ago. Rumors floated about heartbreak, a life uprooted, a man who had chosen solitude over the noise of the world. Emma listened quietly, pretending not to care, but inside she felt an ache of recognition. She knew too well the temptation of hiding from life, of protecting oneself from wounds that might cut too deep. That evening, when the group gathered for readings by the fire, Daniel sat apart, his presence calm, yet commanding. He did not read, nor did he seek attention, but Emma noticed how the silence around him seemed richer, filled with stories unsaid. She found herself drawn to that silence, her imagination restless, her curiosity alive. As the night waned, Emma slipped out into the cool air, her heart unsettled. The stars spread wide above, countless and bright, and she wondered what stories Daniel carried beneath his guarded exterior. A strange certainty stirred within her. Their meeting was not chance. But certainty did not erase fear. Emma had long protected herself with walls of caution, and Daniel, if the rumors were true, carried walls of his own. The thought both frightened and intrigued her. Two guarded souls, standing on the edge of something neither could name. The sea roared in the darkness below, as if reminding her that fate does not wait forever. The days that followed seemed to blur together, each one carrying Emma further into the rhythm of the retreat and, at the same time, deeper into her awareness of Daniel. He remained a quiet figure, often seen walking alone along the shore or sitting with a notebook in the farthest corner of the library. He spoke rarely, yet whenever he entered a room, the air seemed to shift. Emma told herself it was nothing, just curiosity, but she could not deny the subtle changes within her. She found herself writing with a new intensity, as though her pen had tapped into a well long hidden. Her stories grew more vivid, her words braver, And always, somewhere between the lines, she felt his shadow, an unspoken presence weaving through her thoughts. One afternoon, while the retreat participants were given free hours to wander, Emma returned to the cliffs with her notebook. The wind was sharp that day, the sea restless and loud. As she sat on the grass, searching for words, she realized she was not alone. Daniel was there, standing just a few paces away, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He did not approach, nor did he acknowledge her directly, but his presence filled the silence. For a while, they simply existed side by side, two strangers bound by the same view, the same sky, the same restless sea. Emma felt the tension of it, not discomfort, but a strange calm that carried a hidden warmth. In that stillness, she realized something. Silence could be its own kind of language. His solitude did not feel like distance. It felt like invitation, as if he was offering her space to see him, not through words, but through being. That night, Emma lay awake in her room, her mind replaying the image of him against the ocean. She wondered what stories lived behind his quiet eyes, what wounds had driven him into solitude. And most of all, she wondered why the thought of him stirred something in her heart she had long believed dormant. The retreat would last only a few more weeks. That thought pressed upon her like the tide pressing against the cliffs. Time was short, and yet it felt as though something vast had already begun. And while Emma wrestled with her questions, Daniel too sat alone in his room, notebook unopened, staring into the darkness. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest crack in the silence he had so carefully built, a crack caused not by words, but by the quiet presence of a woman who carried her own kind of stillness. Neither of them yet knew what awaited, but both felt the same tremor in the air, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The retreat had reached its midway point, and with it came an air of urgency, as though everyone sensed time slipping faster each day. The manor buzzed with readings, critiques, and late-night conversations that drifted into laughter. Yet for Emma, the world had narrowed. Every glance, every quiet moment seemed to circle back to Daniel. She tried to resist it, reminding herself that she had not come here for love, but for herself. Yet the truth could no longer be denied. Something in his silence had awakened her, and the more she tried to look away, the deeper she was drawn. One stormy afternoon, the sea raged with relentless force, waves colliding against the cliffs as rain lashed the windows. The workshops were canceled, leaving participants scattered around the manor in small clusters. Emma sought solitude in the library, with a crackling fireplace softened the sound of the storm. She had just settled into a chair when she noticed him. Daniel, seated across the room, a book resting in his hands though his eyes remained unfocused. For a long while, they shared the space in silence, the firelight flickering between them. The storm outside mirrored something within her, wild, uncontrollable, demanding release. She realized then that the walls she had built around her heart were no longer as strong as they once were. Emma's thoughts spiraled. She wondered about his past, the wounds whispered about in hushed voices. Had he loved once, only to lose? Had he chosen solitude out of necessity or fear? And if fear, was it the same fear she knew, the fear of being hurt, of being left, of giving too much of herself to someone who might not stay? As the storm raged, Daniel finally lifted his gaze, and their eyes met across the firelit room. No words passed between them. Yet Emma felt more spoken in that glance than in any conversation she had ever known. It was not a look of chance, but of recognition, as though he, too, had felt the invisible thread pulling them closer, despite resistance. That night, Emma could not sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the rain ease into silence, her heart restless. She realized she stood on the edge of something immense, something both beautiful and terrifying. To step forward meant risk of heartbreak, of disappointment, of wounds not yet healed. But to turn away would mean silence, emptiness, the continuation of a life half-lived. And somewhere in his own quiet room, Daniel wrestled with the same storm. He had vowed never to let another into his heart, not after the pain of the past. Yet now, for the first time in years, he felt the faint, undeniable warmth of hope. The storm had passed outside, but inside, both of them stood at the beginning of another one, a storm that would not be ignored. The last days of the retreat came swiftly, as if time itself wished to test those who had found more than they expected within the manor's ivy-covered walls. For Emma, each sunrise carried both anticipation and dread. The thought of leaving this place, of returning to her old life without the presence of Daniel, felt unbearable. Yet she feared the weight of what it would mean to step closer to him, to acknowledge what had grown between them in silence. The final evening arrived with a farewell gathering in the Grand Hall. Candles flickered, casting golden light over the assembled group as laughter and gratitude filled the air. Riders shared their progress, their voices warm with pride. But Emma heard little. Her heart beat to another rhythm, one that drew her eyes toward the quiet figure at the edge of the room. Daniel sat apart, as he always had, yet something in his posture seemed different, less guarded, less withdrawn, as though he too felt the pull of inevitability. When the gathering ended, Emma slipped outside into the cool night. The ocean roared in the distance, steady and eternal. She walked along the path that led to the cliffs, the same place where her journey here had truly begun. The moon cast silver upon the waves, and the air carried the promise of endings and beginnings intertwined. She did not hear his steps, but she felt his presence. Daniel stood beside her, silent as always, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a moment, they simply shared the view, the vastness of sea and sky echoing the vastness within their hearts. Emma realized then that love did not always begin with words. Sometimes it began in silence, in glances, in the simple act of being near. She thought of the wall she had built, of the fears that had held her captive for so long. She thought, too, of the courage it took to step forward into uncertainty. And in that instant, she knew the greatest risk was not in loving, but in walking away from the chance of it. When she finally turned toward him, Daniel's eyes met hers, and in them she saw both the weight of his past and the fragile light of something new. Their silence spoke everything, of pain survived, of hope reborn, of two souls daring to reach for one another despite the scars they carried. The waves crashed below, eternal witnesses to this quiet surrender. And though no promises were spoken, Emma felt the truth settle within her like the tide returning to shore. This was not an ending, but a beginning. The retreat would end. The manor would fade into memory. But something had been found that could not be left behind. And so, under the moonlit sky, Emma and Daniel stood side by side, two hearts once hidden, now uncovered, ready to write a new story together. A story not of endings, but of love, fragile yet fierce, quiet yet unbreakable. A story of beginning again. The end.